Hello, everybody. Good morning and welcome. We are from VIT today, and today we have with us Lieutenant General Kamaljeet Singh to talk about his career in the armed forces and to talk about the current situation between India and China along our borders. Welcome, sir. We are extremely humbled to have you here. Lieutenant General
Thank you.
Kamaljeet Singh superannuated in August 2016 after 39 years of distinguished service. He served as the General Officer and commanded Western Command, an operationally committed corps in Northeast, an armored division in the Strike Corps, a T-90 armored brigade, and an elite armored regiment 63 cavalry. He has also served along with the United Nations peacekeeping forces in Angola. He was awarded with the Chief of Army Staff Commendation and UN Force Commander Citation for bravery in his UN tenure, and has also been awarded the Param Vishisht Seva Medal for his exemplary service. In addition to this, the General Officer has also held key operational staff appointments at important formation HQs and Army HQs in perspective planning, capacity building, and HRD. He currently holds the prestigious Ranjit Singh Chair of Excellence in the Punjab University, Chandigarh, and also regularly writes for leading newspapers. We're extremely humbled to welcome you today, sir.
Thank you. Good morning to all your viewers. And thank you indeed to give me this chance to interact with young people. You know, interacting with you all builds a lot of confidence in us. It's more like recharging our batteries.
It's
Yes,
our
sir.
privilege, sir, to talk to you. So let's begin.
Yes, sir. So often in matters of conflicts along borders or in any armed conflict for that matter, the main damage bearers, or rather the people on the front line, are the soldiers, and often the decision makers are located further back, and there is a chain of command to be followed. What is your take on that, sir?
See, it's in a good system, which is a functional and accountable system. Responsibility is shared. Initially, in the immediate terms, you may hold soldiers or their commanders accountable. Like in 1962, there was a lot of criticism of people who were commanders at that time. And some of them were sacked also. Like General B.M. Kaul, who was the favorite of Prime Minister Nehru, he was also sacked,
Oh, yeah.
despite being so close to him. But go back to 1962 only. Nehru died a very disappointed man. He was humiliated. And Krishna Menon was also sacked. So, depending on the scale of disaster, if it is a small disaster, controllable, then well, the blame could pass on to only soldiers and their commanders. But if it's a national disaster, if it is something which is substantial, then the damage definitely percolates up to the leadership. But you are right to that extent that in armed forces, accountability is very high. So the brunt is borne by people who are on the ground. But India will be a great country if the accountability is shared. See, give very clear cut direction, delegate with those directions, and then be bold enough to take the blame. A good leader is one. Like whenever I had reverses in my command, at least thrice, I have written those letters to tell my boss that I take full and final accountability for this lapse. And you know, when you do this, the chap on top, he realizes no, he's just taking the responsibility. So I wish our political leaders also graduate to this, where you have made an error in judgment. One must accept it. It happens.
Yes, sir. So in the very same line, where do you think we draw the line between military independence and control from higher ups? What balance do we need to strike?
See, you are Sarthak.
Shreyans, sir.
Sorry, Shreyansh. Shreyansh,
Yes, sir.
see, it's like this, that our any decision making structure, and let's take this scenario where we are uh, combating this challenge in Leh, in Ladakh, rather Ladakh. So let us take this scenario, because every day we read newspapers, we watch channels. So if you start from top, there is, of course, the Cabinet Committee of Security, and CCPA, Cabinet Committee of Political Affairs, which has got Prime Minister, which has got Defense Minister, Minister of External Affairs, Finance Minister, and people are invited. Like CDS could be invited for consultation. You come down and you have CDS who has no operational responsibility currently. So he really is operationally not responsible for what is happening. He is to build the capability. When we graduate to American system, where you have theater command, then the CDS becomes accountable. Then you have the Chief of Army Staff, Air Force and Navy, and then you have a command headquarters in Udhampur, which is called Northern Command. Now, Northern Command in this case currently is being commanded by General Y.K. Joshi, a Kargil hero who fought the Kargil War. He commanded the same corps in Leh, and now he's the Northern Army Commander. So he is a domain and area specialist. And then you have the 14 Corps, which is in Leh. This is all unclassified. This is all in public domain. So I'm sharing it with all your readers and viewers. So this 14 Corps is headquartered in Leh, and it's currently being commanded by Lieutenant General Harinder Singh, who goes for all these negotiations which you read about. Now, he is also a domain expert. He has worked in these areas. And then you have divisions over there. So there are protocols laid down for border management. What your viewers and readers should apply their mind to is that these borders are being managed by Indian Army. Now there is a thought to say that it should be managed by Indo-Tibetan Border Police, because there are protocols like this, that you will not use arms, you will not use force, and armed forces are trained to use force. So there is a thought process now that this responsibility of patrolling the buffer zone must be passed on to Indo-Tibetan Border Police. But coming back to your main question, there are protocols laid down. Like currently, protocol has been revised. Now, in self-defense, you're allowed to use the firearm. There are areas laid down that you cannot, without notifying the other side, you can't use any warlike activity 3 kilometers either side of the border or line of actual control, whatever it is. So there are responsibilities given. You all would have heard of an expression that armed forces has been given a free hand. Free hand is always there. It depends on which commander is on the ground. Unfortunately, like you all are training to be technocrats and managers, there'll be many who will take initiative and will stretch the rules, and there'll be other lot who will always look over their shoulder because they're not confident. I will accept this fact that is somehow has also happened in armed forces. But let's again roll the clock back and look at history. After 1962 war, we had a real, we call it skirmish because officially it is called skirmish, but actually there was a full-scale action, operational action which took place at Nathula and Chola. These are two passes in Sikkim. And the man in charge over there was Major General Sagat Singh. He was the General Officer commanding of Sikkim Division, which is headquartered in Gangtok. I commanded same corps, that's why I know it in great detail. And so if you watch my hand, so starting from north, there is Chola, in center is Nathula, and then there is Jalepla. Put it in context. So Jalepla is a very famous pass. Captain Young husband went on an expedition through that. But what happened? When in 67 there was a face-off, orders were given from top that disengage, withdraw. Jalepla withdrew, and now Jalepla is with Chinese. But Sagat Singh stood his ground. He said, this is not how I interpret the order. I will not disengage, I'll not withdraw back. And that's why Chola and Nathula are with us. We lost 400 people, but it is said Chinese lost more than 800. And in 1967, we actually jettisoned the 62 mentality. So orders are there. It's not as if the lines are fuzzy. Control is indeed excised, but good commanders, and I would sort of motivate your managers and technocrats who come out of your wonderful institution, that in life, responsibility only comes to those who take it. See, if those brave men in Galwan had not decided to counterattack after Colonel Santosh Babu was humiliated, then the strategic messaging, it was a tactical action, but strategic reverberation. Chinese just couldn't have imagined. They had got killer squad, and they had rubber suits and knuckle dusters and those deadly and barbaric weapons they used. And yet Indians spontaneously got together. And now there are reports varying between 40 to 103 also, people are saying people were killed. So now those people also could have been passive.
Yes, sir. So our next question is that after the Chumar Valley incident, the Pathankot Air Base attack where India's bid at the UN was blocked by China, why has India still been following appeasement policy per se? When LAC saw significant escalation from China's side and it tried to acquire no man's land. So why is this India's stance currently, according to you?
See, I like to clarify something, that this appeasement thing has been going on for a very long time. It's not only after Chumar. It is not Chumur, which some of you call it Chumar. And it is not after Pathankot also. See, it is basically, it has been our desire to settle the things through negotiations, through talks. And basically, if you look at it now, let us separate Pathankot from Chumar and Dipsang and Doklam and now Galwan, that is Chinese border, LAC, and let's look at Pathankot as line of control. That's a separate. So there was some sort of restraint exercise. Why Pathankot? Even after Parliament attack, after Mumbai attack, and we had Operation Prakram, but we never took it upon ourselves to carry out any operation. Even in Kargil, we did not cross the line of control. We have been exercising restraint, but Modi government decided to change and decided to explore the space, because Pakistan always said that they will use a nuclear weapon, and there is no space between the hybrid war and nuclear weapon. But India demonstrated to Pakistan that hybrid space is here, nuclear is here, in between we can discover space. It may not be this big, but it is there. This much of space is there. So we carried out Uri, after Uri incident, we carried out surgical strikes 1. Then we carried out Balakot. So on LOC, we are really currently following a muscular kind of policy. But can we do it against Pakistan, against China? To do it against China, we need to build up our capability. See, there is a force level and there is a parity. With Pakistan, we have the upper edge. But the upper edge is not decisive enough. If it was decisive, then we'll have decisive deterrence, something which will hold Pakistan here, and they will not do any mischief with us. So this gap, this asymmetry is deterrence, decisive deterrence, deterrence which is credible, which works. And India's interpretation is punitive deterrence. I will do surgical strike. I will hit you in Balakot. So This is this phenomenon. With China, what do we have? With China, we are here. China is up. So, can we do this? It's not possible. Their infrastructure is better. Their force levels are better. They are a nuclear armed nation. So, what can we do? We can, in localized scenarios, because our armed forces, and it's not because I've been in armed forces and I've been parochial. Our armed forces have that tactical capability, that capability on ground. They've been exposed to conflicts right from 47. They have fought the war in 62, may not have done well. Then 65, then 67, this skirmish took place. 71, 99 Kargil, proxy war in J&K, insurgency in Northeast. So our army is so well trained. And then being in Siachen, our capabilities in those altitudes are good. So we can hold up. But frankly, we don't have the capability as yet. We must build that capability if we want to safeguard our autonomy, our borders properly. We must build that capability. Till then, we'll have to discover ways through mixed sort of a slew of measures we'll have to take. This coercive posturing, deployment, economic measures like banning apps, limited utility, but has been done. Help from our allies, some posturing by Navy happening in South China Sea now. And we hope with a combination of this, we may be able to deter China. This is how I look.
Right. So when you're talking about diplomatic or making better connections with our allies and gaining capability in that sense. So you've yourself been a defense diplomat in 20 countries to date. So do you think this will finally change India's non-alignment policy on a diplomatic front? Or will India continue to not side with any major polarizing country as of now?
See, firstly, let me give you a caveat to start off with. You can't over rely on your allies. The dirty job you'll have to do it yourself. Nobody will fight for you. The proxy war in J&K, we are fighting ourselves. And Americans have a wonderful way of saying good terror and bad terror. My terror is acceptable for them. What is happening in J&K and what is happening in Afghanistan when they were deployed was not acceptable to them. Now that their army is pulling out, so that terror is again becoming acceptable to them. So the bottom line is no ally will come and fight for you. Very rarely. Nobody will. Nobody will even give you weapons on non-commercial terms. Everybody will be a business partner. So they will extract the price. And what you will order now, like you are ordering in emergency, will not come for this price. It will only be relevant for future. Because by the time it arrives, nobody pulls out from his own or their own inventory. So it has to come, it has to be inspected, it has to be inducted, some training has to be done, and by which time that crisis is gone. So bottom line, defined. Now let's go to your main question. India has followed non-alignment. So first, during Nehru's time, we had non-alignment 1.0 and followed Panchsheel, non-violence, respect to sovereignty and territorial integrity, and all these kind of pacifistic kind of principles which were enshrined in Panchsheel. Later, we redefined non-alignment and it became something like non-alignment 2.0. But closer to 1971 war, we did a pact with Russians. And Russians thereafter became some kind of our strategic partners. But if you contrast it with Pakistan, Pakistan right from the word go walked into US affiliated CENTO and SEATO, Southeast Asian Treaty Organization and Central Treaty Organization. Thereafter, they became great friends with Chinese, and they have always liked to be surrogate. And they have done it beautifully. It is serving their purpose. We may have any views, but frankly speaking, all this talk of ethics, morals, and all these kind of things don't work in international relations and diplomacy. There, the prime thing is interest. I want my interest. So, coming back to India, after this honeymoon with Russians, we then started getting close to America. And we did some agreements with America like CASA, Leoma, which gives certain interoperability with America. Americans would want us to go and sit in their lap, which Indians have not done. India has been trying to look at possibility of being a balancer. A balancer is one who leverages instability to see the poles which are rising is America and now China. In between, India wants to be a balancer and thereby retain the strategic autonomy that we have. This was our aspiration. Now, China having done this to us, will we be able to be meaningful balancer? I am not sure. It's unlikely. We'll have to take greater reliance from Americans, from Quad, which is a grouping of Americans, Japanese, Australians, and Indians. Something called as I5. I5 is Australia, Canada, New Zealand, America, and England, those 5 countries. So some such groupings we'll have to take, we'll have to rely on. But again, coming back to the crux of the whole thing, if you want to be a meaningful balancer, you have to have your own capability. You have to have your own muscle. I'm sorry to say, in last 6-7 years or even a decade, we have, because of we focused on economic, and that also we couldn't achieve, we have not given enough attention to building capability. We first ignored the infrastructure with China, and then we have also cut down our budget. You see Australia now. Australia has announced its budget by 40%. Why? Because Australia feels that post-COVID, the world will be very unstable and there will be new threats. So Australia wants to build its muscle. Australia doesn't have any land borders with anybody. It's well protected by sea, but it wants to build in the capability. So to you, I will like to say, and through you to all the viewers, that if you want to be even a meaningful balancer, you need to build your capability. Ideally, India should not be in any grouping firmly. It should have the capability to leverage whatever alliances are there, draw whatever is good and relevant for us. Yet we should retain our strategic autonomy, because no ally will give you everything that you desire. They will always factor their own interests.
Right, sir. So now another thing that we've been hearing a lot of on the news recently is how certain personnel in the army or the air force or any of the armed forces, when they raise concerns or certain issues against their higher officials, they've reported that they've been transferred away as retaliation. So how can we create a mechanism to prevent this from happening and make sure that the voice of our soldiers is heard?
See, I have worked in HR of armed forces. Now, allow me to tell you that out of all the HR systems we have in our country, armed forces would still compete to be the most objective one. I'll tell you how. if you want to, like yesterday, DIG of Kanpur was sacked. There was something against him and he was sacked. In army, it's difficult to do it. You can sack a person. There is always that, but it will have to be done under emergency provisions. Like when I go and command a battalion or a regiment, I am from Armored Corps, so I commanded a regiment. And in country, it is called battalion. When you command a battalion, you are given a fixed tenure, and tenure is 2.5 to 3 years. So removing you from that tenure is indeed very difficult. It's emergency provision. When you are a brigade commander, you again have a fixed tenure from nearly 2 years. You are a division commander, you have a tenure from 18 months to 2 years. You are a corps commander, again you have a fixed tenure. Army commander, you have a fixed tenure. Rotation can take place, but it doesn't happen so frequently. Actually, lots of what we hear and what you are trying to say is magnified hype, because allow me to tell you, I served in armed forces for 40 years. I came without any connection. I came from a village in Bharat, studied in a Hindi medium school till class 5, and then went to a military school, Sainik school, and then from 1966, for last 60 plus years, I have been somehow with armed forces. In a Sainik school, National Defense Academy, IMA, and Army. And okay, I also didn't get everything that I desired. I also had crips. But my father was in civil service. I see people in police. Now I work with Information Commission. I still feel that armed forces system is quite objective. It can be refined. It can be improved. It must be improved. But I would rather say Ashok Khemka, who is in Haryana, has been transferred 70 times in 30 odd years. His average tenure is 6 months. So in armed forces, it's not so easy. It's not. I would not take this fully. There are certain cases where it happens, and we must correct. That I'll accept.
Right. So our concluding question is: so you started off in 1977 as in proper service in the army, and so that was right after the emergency that India had, and it was uplifted in 1977. And so since then, you have also served with UN in Angola. And so if you were to share one experience that stands out, that was extremely difficult for you to cope up with, and how did you manage to get through with it and get to a solution to it? So what would it be, sir? So that we can share with our viewers what hardships are really like and how to overcome.
Okay, let me first tell you that since we got into some bit of my life, I joined a Sainik school in 1966. Why? Because 65 war had happened and it was a people's war, and my parents somehow felt, and nobody in our family had ever been in armed forces. They felt that I must go to armed forces. So I went to armed forces, 66. In 1973, I joined NDA. I had qualified to join BITS Pilani, something like your BIT. I could have been a technocrat. I had also qualified to go to Dufferin or Merchant Navy. I had also qualified to go to Hotel Management Institute in Pusa. And I asked my father, who told me that don't become a cook. Those days, this chef business had not started. There were no Vikas Khanna, there was no Sanjeev Chopra, such celebrity cooks. So he said, don't become a cook. But I chose to go to NDA. Why? Because 71 war had finished. And since then, it's been a journey like this. But since you asked me for one defining experience, let me tell you what happened with me in Angola. I was in a UN peacekeeping mission, and we had to go to a place where our international workers had got marooned in a camp which had been overrun by rebels, because Angola was a civil war going on between one faction, which was the government faction MPLA, and UNITA, which was the second faction. And UNITA was a very cruel kind of a rebel group. So our international workers, Red Cross and UN, were in a compound, and that area got taken over by rebels. So we said, okay, we have to get them out. So we arranged a helicopter flight. We got through to that UNITA because we had channels with them. And we told them that our helicopter will be white. We'll come at such and such time. We'll land at such and such place. Now, knowing that it was in rebel area and rebels were so ruthless, not many people were willing to go in that mission. So there was one boss of mine, he was there. And then there was a Red Cross worker, and we were three of us. So we were there. An Egyptian, my boss, me, and a Swedish Red Cross worker. So normally there are 8-10 people who go on such mission, but we were just 3. We went, and when we were going to land, I was guiding the pilots. Pilots were 2 Russians who had flown in the Afghanistan war. Now they didn't know English at all. They knew just some expressions, some phrases they could speak, just basic, slow, fast, right, left, these kind of. That was their knowledge of English, and I didn't know Russian. So we were landing. I was guiding them, and then we heard the bullets, machine gun fire. One pilot was hit on his hand, and then the helicopter lurched because RPG shot grazed against. We were lucky. So only thing I could tell the pilot is pull out, capital, because we had come from capital, Luanda. So he had the nerves. The guy who was hit was also hit only on his hand. So he still was helping on working on his joystick and all. So they pulled out. And we were lucky indeed because we pulled out of fire. If we had pulled into fire, we would have been sitting down. So we survived. Now, what do? You can't leave your people marooned over there. So what do? So mind keeps ticking, your resolve keeps building. So I came out with a solution, and God has to be kind. He always shows you the path, he or she. If you worship the Devi, then she, and if you worship a Devta, then it is he, whatever it is. But they show the path. So path was shown to me, and I realized that there was one person in UNITA headquarters who had worked in Goa operations. He spoke some Hindi also, and he spoke Portuguese and little bit of English, and I could speak some Portuguese. So I got through to him, and he was number 3 in the hierarchy of that troop. So I said, okay, for next 10 days, on your radio, it was called Cocker Radio, you announce that on such and such date, the helicopter will come again. Because when we asked those guys, why did you fire on us? They had a very strange explanation. They said, we are rebels. We have groups within groups. We can't control everybody. So some idiot has fired. We disown him. So we said, okay, now you announce for 10 days that the helicopter will come again, white color helicopter. But between the 2 pilots will be standing Bula Matadi, that man, number 3 in the hierarchy. He'll be standing there. His life is at stake. Actually, we were taking a hostage into this kind of thing. And I was standing behind him. Now, another thing interesting is that now for the second mission, it was only me and that Swedish guy. My boss also dropped out. He said, KJ Singh, you got suicidal tendencies. Why should I go with you? So it was that Swedish Red Cross worker, because Red Cross people were stranded, and me, 2 of us. But our shield was Bula Matadi, standing in front. We had an eventless flight. We went, we landed, they greeted us, they gave us beer also. We got people out, But the lesson that comes out is that you can't sit without hope. Every challenge throws up an opportunity. Chinese have a wonderful expression, they call it Wai Chi, that in every danger, there is an inherent opportunity. We have to exploit. And you have to find your way out. You can't just give up something because you had a setback. You have to reinvent, you have to find another path, and you have to work around the situation. And if you do that, it's all about taking responsibility. See, after this particular thing, I'm sorry, you'll have to pardon me. It's a little bit of ego, I would be indulging in ego boosting for myself. I became a hero in that mission. Everybody thought here is one guy who can do anything. So it depends on how much responsibility you take. And nothing will come easy. And in any case, you'll have to take some risks. Without risks, nothing will happen in life. They are calculated risks. You have to do risk mitigation. You have to check out it doesn't unsettle your entire thing. And then you must definitely take risks. Actually, before I conclude this with you, you all are youngsters. So in your formative years, in your early part of career, you must do proper risk mitigation, work your options, fallback options. But when I retired, I'm telling you, in my last 5-6 years, my mantra was flirt with the impossible. Because if you look at impossible, it is I am possible. And if you have served for 40 years, and after 30 odd years, you don't start flirting with the impossible, then what have you achieved? You have to push the envelope. Take it beyond the normal defined templates. So that's the message I leave with you. But don't start doing it in first few years of your life. Remain centered on risk mitigation, options, contingencies. As you gather speed, momentum, years in your career, then look to challenge the impossible.
Right, sir. So that's a wonderful message that you have given for us. And sir, we're really thankful for your insightful answers. And this was a wonderful experience talking to you about the Indian Army and various things that we did not know of. And sir, with that, we'd like to thank you and thank you so much for joining us.
If I can leave one final message. See,
Definitely,
many of you will think that I should join armed forces. You get temporarily sort of motivated. It's not necessary for everyone to join us. Because see, armed forces need certain category of people. There are enough people who are aspiring to join, and those who make the grade will go there. You wouldn't know Abdul Kalam tried to join Air Force, and he didn't succeed. Thank God he didn't succeed, because we have missiles. If he had joined Air Force and flown a couple of planes, what benefit? Nothing. But since he became a scientist, India had missiles. So setbacks will be there. But what I can leave the message with you all is, be good citizen warriors. I call them Nagrik Yodha, a good citizen warrior. Because today, border is not only at Ladakh. Border is also terrorism. It can happen in your city. Our parliament has been attacked. World Trade Center in New York has been attacked. Akshardham Temple was attacked. So any place today, the terrorists can come. Pathankot was attacked. So be good, conscious citizens, contribute to this nation, and make it technologically and economically powerful. If you'll make it powerful, we'll have more money, more innovations, more technology to apply. And you'll be actually helping armed forces until now. So work with that thing excel in your sphere and do well. And thank you for giving me a chance to connect with you. Like I always say, connecting with young people motivates us and recharges our batteries. So thank you. And yours is a wonderful institution.
Thank you.
I know many of you would go places. Do go places, do well for the country, and give something back to armed forces. Thank you.
Thank
Jai
you.
Hind.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.